You are listening to ESL Talk, a podcast made for English teachers by English teachers.
Hello, welcome to another new episode of ESL Talk.
I'm Faye.
And I'm Daniel. In our episode today, we're going to be discussing the topic of bilingualism in the ESL classroom. When it comes to English language learning and education, many students are not only bilingual, but some speak even more languages, trilingual or multilingual.
Yes, and our special guest today is Fabi. She's a language coach who works with young students and families to help them become bilingual or even trilingual. I'm really excited about this personally because I'm trying to raise my daughter bilingually. So this, of course, can also be applied to our young learners and to all of us learning English.
Yeah, exactly. So let's share some of our own experiences of this topic. Faye, I know you were fortunate enough to grow up in a bilingual environment. How was this encouraged? How was this enforced? And how did you kind of adapt to and, live with that environment growing up?
Yes, my parents never really spoke English at home, but I think that's also because my mom never had the opportunity to study English herself. And that was a huge thing for her. And one of the reasons why she made sure my sister and I had that opportunity really early on. So I went to English immersion preschool. So I got alphabetized in English before Portuguese. But one thing my parents always encouraged us to do is just surround ourselves with English. And interestingly, my mother at the time owned a video rental store, like a Blockbuster.
Wow.
Yeah. And at the time, it was all VHS tapes, no DVDs. And I every day after school, I'd go to her store and I would pick a tape to take home and watch a movie after school. And I just very early on started taking tapes of movies instead of like cartoons and things. And there weren't that many movies that were dubbed in Portuguese. They were mostly subtitled. And I was really young at the time, so I couldn't read subtitles that fast. So I just basically had that immersion at home through movies and watching movies, not always appropriate for my age, but all kinds of movies, and learning a lot of slangs and a lot of expressions and music as well. I remember listening to actually recording music from the radio on cassette. Britney Spears, I remember really well. And I would just try to transcribe it because at the time you couldn't get the lyrics online. And so those things I think were really helpful for me. It was sort of just out of necessity and out of my own interest, but I sort of created that own immersion at home. And it was very, very much encouraged by my parents.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a very fortunate experience because you're able to draw from all those things. And definitely movies, TV shows, music, those are the best ways to learn a language because generally it's enjoyable, it's fun, it's exciting, and you can have a little bit of a window into other parts of the world, other cultures.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think it definitely helps.
Did you ever have any exposure to a second language in the UK? Was it just English all the time everywhere?
Yeah, British people generally tend to only speak English, and some of them don't really speak English that well. In high school, you are supposed to learn a second language. I took Spanish, and there was a time when my Spanish was okay, was decent. But once I started learning Korean, all the Spanish disappeared out of my brain. And now if I try to speak Spanish, it comes out Korean or vice versa. So it kind of was wasted. I think, unfortunately, the attitude that British people have is that if we go to another country to visit, well, they want to learn English, they should know some English, and we're helping them in a way, which is absurd. But I always try, no matter where it is, I always try to learn a little bit of the language of that country just to kind of get by, just to be polite.
Survival.
And generally what will happen is if people see you're making an effort, they'll tend to be nicer and kinder and more helpful. That's what I found.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And now that you speak Korean, would you say you are bilingual, having learned this language even as an adult?
No, I wouldn't say so, because there's still the nuances, there's still certain expressions or certain dialects that I really have trouble with. Now I know some Koreans do as well. But I think I reached a good level where, like I said, I can function, I can navigate, I can do things for myself. It was all about being independent. So that's why I was really motivated to learn, because things like going to the bank, going to the hospital, going to the immigration office. These are things that are really difficult if you don't have a good level of Korean, and relying on others. I really don't like to burden other people. I guess that's a British thing, but we don't want to put other people out. So I really tried hard to do everything by myself and navigate by myself. So it was difficult, but by putting myself in that situation, I think it really helped me with that. But I wouldn't say I'm bilingual. I guess it depends on the definition. And I know Fabi's going to discuss that a little bit later. So we'll hear a little bit more from her on that. But you mentioned about your daughter, you want to help her to kind of be bilingual and learn new languages. So how are you going to do that? What approaches will you take to help her?
Well, there's definitely the approach I planned on taking while I was pregnant and reading books about it and having studied, applied linguistics and language acquisition. Now then pandemic and then reality happened. So it's kind of a bit of a mess right now, but our main goal is that she speaks Portuguese at home because she's growing up in an English speaking country. So we do think that once she starts going to school and all that, she's still a year and a half old. So once she starts going to school more regular, she'll probably just speak English all the time. And Portuguese is definitely going to become more of her background language and not really what she speaks or wants to use. So we're making more of an effort to speak more Portuguese to her at home, expose her to that as much as we can. And what I find is I end up teaching more of the, let's say, daycare survival words in English. So like we've taught her like the words help or excuse me, please, thank you, these things in English, because those are the things she'll use to interact with people outside the home. And then other things we just have her say in Portuguese for now. She doesn't speak that much. She doesn't say sentences yet, but that's sort of the approach we're taking. But I'm really excited to hear what Fabi has to say about what is a good way to do it, right? Because to me, instinctively, it seems like exposure is what we want her to have. And hopefully that's enough. Now for you, in your case, to maintain that language or maintain Korean, do you try to speak it when you are at home or to friends, or how do you do that?
That's a great question. Generally, this is pretty funny, but generally, what I do is I'll have a Korean lesson, maybe once or twice a month online, just to keep my conversation going, learn some new words, learn some new vocabulary, try to be more comfortable and less kind of anxious to use it regularly. And then again, I'm a big foodie. I love Korean food. I love Chinese food. I love a lot of different kinds of food. So every time I go to a Korean place, it's great because I can just start practicing right away. And usually they're very shocked to hear me speaking Korean. So they usually want to speak with me and find out about my life and vice versa. So that's usually a good way to get to practice, is just going for food or whatever. And then I still have a lot of friends and coworkers who speak Korean as well, who I used to work with. And I'll chat to them occasionally. So I do try to maintain it. I don't make a conscious effort to say I'm going to do an hour a week or 2 hours a week, but just kind of gently and regularly, just so I don't lose it, just to kind of
just finding those opportunities, right? Which is a good lesson for our students.
Keep that muscle memory going, I think. So yeah. So in terms of learning, in terms of language learners, would you say that bilingual or multilingual students make better English language learners in your experience?
I do think that being able to speak a second language makes it a lot easier to speak a third or fourth language, from personal experience.
Why do you say that?
At least? Yeah, because from me, when I started, for example, learning French, it actually helped me. The fact that I spoke English and Portuguese helped me make sense of a lot of the things. Like if I was learning a new grammar rule or a new word, new vocabulary, if it wasn't similar to the mechanics of Portuguese, it was similar to the mechanics of English. And although we talked about this in a previous episode, I didn't like translating the language. I don't think that's the way to do it. It's just kind of making sense in your brain of what the patterns are of the language, and just that sense of familiarity. Having said that, when I tried to learn Japanese, it was all out the window because it's a completely different language. Unless you're saying things like sandwich, which is sanduichi. And then it's like, okay, that's easy enough. But once you start to try to write or form sentences and all that. So I think that it depends on the languages you speak. So if you're trying to learn a third language that has something in common with one of the other two languages you speak, it definitely makes it a lot easier. Now, there are studies that say, right, that bilingual brains learn better, or whatever smarter and things like that. I'm not sure I feel that way. I don't think that's something that for me is applicable, but it doesn't hurt to try, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about being bilingual as a teacher? Do you think that that helps you? Is there an advantage to you being able to speak a second language and then being a teacher?
I want to say yes, but I need to stop saying this. But again, it goes back to the teacher themselves, because I've met teachers who speak 2 or 3 different languages, but they might not speak those 2 or 3 languages that well, or they might not be able to use them for teaching particularly well. I mean, I know many people who are bilingual and they're at the same level for both, and when it comes to actually teaching the language, they find that more difficult. So there's probably going to be advantages, because again, the slang, the nuances, the pronunciation, the grammar, you can give feedback more readily. So I think there's some benefits there, but again, it just depends on the individual. There probably are advantages, but I've just seen a very mixed bag in my experience. But how about for you?
Don't you think that it could also make you more sympathetic to what your students feel like? The fact that you went through that experience of learning a second language.
Yes.
That's how I think it is very advantageous to us as teachers, right? It does make us, if not, at least understand how our students feel, but also understand what kind of questions they might have, like what kind of things our brains just kind of latch onto. Or,
It's a great point. I've been doing this so long now that's kind of automatically, I don't know, encoded, and I don't even think about it consciously right now. But yeah, you definitely have a great point there. Understanding the process from the other side is really key. So I think if you have learned another language, then definitely you can see that. And one other point I want to make as well is that if you have gone through that process of becoming a competent or an advanced learner or speaker of another language, you can be the role model for that student, right? You can say, well, I wasn't that good 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but with practice and following the steps and doing what you need to do, that's going to help you. So I think that's really crucial.
That's very true. Yeah. And it just reminded me of when I was doing a lot of teacher training new teachers and teaching the TESOL certificate. The first day of classes was always a second language lesson. So we would always have a lot of native speakers taking the course, right, to teach. And I'd start with, sometimes I would teach a lesson in Portuguese, just like basic introductions. And it was really humbling for them. And I remember after that class, starting the course with that, and the students, the trainees would always tell me, wow, that first lesson was so helpful for me to just put myself in my students' shoes and feel how they feel, and to just notice how I need to grade my language, how I need to be friendlier, more motivate, encouraging to them and all that. So yeah, I think it at least makes you that more sympathetic.
That's great advice.
Great. So let's now move on to our interview with Fabi. We're all both really excited to see what she's going to have to say about all of this that we've discussed.
All right, let's get started with today's interview. Hi, Fabienne. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So we're going to get started with a few questions today. So just first of all, Fabienne, tell us a little bit about your journey and background in teaching so far.
My name is Fabiane. You can call me Fabi. I'm from Brazil, South America. And I was born and raised in Brazil. And I started learning English when I was 13 years old. And since I started learning English, I knew that I wanted to live or travel abroad. So when I was 19, I moved to the United States, and as an exchange student, and I lived there for almost 2 years. Then I came back to Brazil, and I just knew that I wanted to be a teacher and help others to learn. But before going to America, I had already started teaching young children to learn English as a teacher. And yeah, so I just, after a certain time in America, I came back to Brazil, and then I went back to teaching. And yeah, since then, yeah, I've been teaching in Brazil at home too, because I raised my both children speaking English at home. Yeah.
Great. So Fabi, why did you choose the area of multilingualism, or why is that your specialism? Why did you decide to focus on that as your focus?
Yes. Well, I would say, Daniel, that my parents encouraged me a lot. My dad here in Brazil didn't have a chance to study a lot. And my mom went to college, but they knew that it was important learning. English was an important language to learn. So I would say that I was encouraged at home by my parents. And every time that someone traveled or someone spoke English around us, or we watched TV or anything similar to that, they would say, wow, how cool, how nice. English is an important language. And since I would say a child, they would, say that and mention that at home. So I just went ahead, and then I started liking it, and I started loving English as soon as I started studying it.
It definitely helps if you have a motivation. That makes it so much easier, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And you now more recently started working with families who want to raise bilingual children, right? Instead of just teaching English to children, you've started helping families who want to do that with their own kids. What made you start doing that kind of work and working with the families directly?
Yeah, well, as I raised my children bilingually living in Brazil, I was not so sure that this was something extremely special or so different and even challenging. But I met friends in Europe last year after the pandemic, and they just went ahead and said, this is something that you should do for other families as well, because you did so well. My kids now speak Portuguese, English, and German because they lived in Germany for a while as exchange students as well. So, yes. So that I recorded courses, and now I have courses, I have ebooks, and I give a mentorship to families. And lots of families, yes, have been looking for this kind of help to do the same at home, which is it's challenging, but it brings so many benefits. And I have noticed this inside my house with my own children. There are so many advantages. I mean, I have never had to pay like English schools for my children.
Oh, wow.
And in Brazil, bilingual schools are extremely expensive. And so that is something that now it's my passion, and I love doing that. Lots of families just ask me for, advice, and they go like, really? Yes, I'm trying this and it really works. So.
Awesome. So what would you say to people that say that you can only really raise a child bilingually if you live in another country that is not the language you speak at home? Because you raised your kids bilingually in Brazil, right? You taught them as if you were living in another country, basically. So what would you say to people like that?
As soon as you have a goal, Faye, I would say that if it's something that you really like and you really wish and you dream, it's possible. It's like learning English, right? Yeah. It's like learning English or learning anything in life. So it is something that makes me think how all those years of bilingualism at home, because my oldest kid is 25 years old. And he has so many opportunities. When he lived in Berlin, he was working for one of the 4 best companies of accountancy in Berlin. And then I'm like, come on, all started because one day my parents encouraged me, and I decided to do the same with my children at home. So I believe that when you have a dream, when you want something really bad, you should go for it and find ways. I remember so many times here in Brazil, I don't know how it is in your country, but here in Brazil it's very difficult and expensive also to find materials, books, whatever, in English. Now I would say it's easier, but 25 years ago, it was very difficult. And then I used to go to old books stores to buy used books. If I found cassette tapes, I would buy and listen to them with stories and songs. And of course, because I had lived in America for a while, I made friends there. And the family and the friends that I made there, they used to help me too. And they would send me sometimes use the materials that they used with their children. They used to ship to me, to mail to me in Brazil. I mean, I had all this figured out. I was like, I need to do it. I want to do it. So I'm going to do it. I just spread out the news, I'm going to do it. I need your help. Whoever speaks some English, go ahead, speak with my children as well, and have fun with them, just, in a fun way, to have this interaction. This interaction is really important as well. It's like when you teach a child or a teenager or an adult learning English, you know that this interaction is very important, right? Not just one person speaking, but the other one also trying to communicate.
Right. That's a really, really beautiful story as well. Like that your passion and your motivation, you didn't let anything get in the way.
Yes, I am, Daniel.
It's great. So the next thing I wanted to ask you, Fabi, is how would you define what a bilingual person is? I mean, when can we say someone's achieved full bilingualism? I know for me, I speak Korean quite well, not to a native level, but I can function, I can survive, I can have conversations, and I can think in that language. So is it thinking? Is it survival? What would you say makes someone truly bilingual?
Well, my thesis, Daniel, I went to school after my children were born, and I took a specialization course in bilingualism. And I learned that I would say around maybe 20 years ago, to be bilingual, you needed to have exactly the same fluency in 2 languages. And this has changed recently. Okay. So if you are able to communicate and people can understand what you are saying, you are bilingual. So I believe that it's because the world has changed so much lately, and people, I don't know if it's the right word to say, are more relaxed towards learning, but I believe they have more fun learning, and they enjoy this opportunity that we are having now, for example, that we are in different countries and we can communicate and we can have fun, we can learn from each other, right? So it's not only about being able to speak or read or think, but it's the whole context. And then when there is some communication and you can carry on a conversation, I believe that is bilingualism.
Wonderful.
Nice. And what do you think is the best age for children then to start learning a second language to achieve this bilingualism more easily?
As soon as the mother knows that she's pregnant.
Wow.
No. But really, there are lots of studies related to this. And of course, there are some differences. There are some people, or how can I say, people that study bilingualism, researchers that say that when the child is about 3 months old, in the belly, when the mother is pregnant, yes, in the womb, the child can hear her mother speaking, their mother speaking. Okay, so can recognize the mother's tongue. But I believe in that. Since you were pregnant, mothers should start speaking, and if there is a partner around, should also speak the same language or another language and start bilingualism while you are pregnant. But as soon as possible, I would say as soon as possible. Because if you think a child who starts speaking English or Japanese or Portuguese, that child will start speaking that other language because that's the language that she hears around her. So that's how, so it's not, I wouldn't recommend, like parents who decide, no, first I want to wait for my child to speak my mother tongue, and then I'm going to use a second language. I would, but it's always possible, right? I have had students who are like 60, 70 years old and they became fluent in English. So I would say message. That
it's never too late. It's never too early. Basically.
Exactly. Thank you, Daniel. Exactly.
So Fabi, when it comes to young students, maybe you've just started teaching them, or you're just beginning with those students, how can we foster multilingualism or bilingualism in those young students? What are some strategies or some techniques we can use?
Yeah, I would say that it depends on the way, on their ages, because 10-year-old kids have different interests than young adults, right? But I would say that always focus on whatever they like, whatever is interesting for them. Is the same with children at home. If you sit down with a 5-year-old girl and try to teach her grammar, it's not going to happen, right? But if you sing songs, if you play games, and anything fun for her, it's going to happen. They're going to learn. So I would say that depends a lot on their ages. For young adults, I always recommend singing songs, finding their favorite bands, music bands. Sometimes even there are some students that like journaling and reading different topics about their favorite actors and actresses. Anything that is interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We've talked about this a couple of times before, but making it relevant and, like you said, making it interesting and fun for the student rather than imposing a topic or something. This is what we're reading now. What do you want to read, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I have a 10-year-old student who likes to play hangman. And I have every class I have to play, and I have been finding different ways to play the same game. But as a teacher, or when you are a parent, you are going to find ways to help your child, or me as a teacher to help your students to keep enjoying it. But it comes, I think it comes from my passion for teaching and all the advantages of being bilingual. It's amazing. I think all the opportunities that you have in life, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Well, we can definitely tell that you're very passionate about what you do. Is there any final message you'd like to leave our listeners with in terms of maybe they are raising bilingual kids at home, or they're working with children in a bilingual environment? What would be your final piece of advice?
I would say that it is possible, and it's so helpful for everybody, right? It's helpful for the parents, for the children, for the world. Because when we have better children, step by step, right? You're going to teach that child, and taking a step every day, one small step every day. And when you teach someone, you are learning more, and you create a bond with the other person, right? So we all want to have a connection with someone. We want to have friends. We want to have people around us that we can talk to, and we can exchange experiences. We can become friends. So just keep going. Learning another language is amazing for everybody. And it doesn't, like Daniel said, never too early, never too late. So just go for it, and count on me for whatever you need.
Right. And how can our listeners find you? What's the best way to contact you, and what can you help them with?
Yeah, well, for now, I have my Instagram account that I use for helping parents right now at the moment, helping parents raise bilingual children. It's welcomeenglish.class. I'm also on Facebook. I have my courses, my ebooks, and I don't know how much more I should talk about.
No, as much as you want. I mean,
you can edit this, okay?
That's great.
I do have. Yeah. Last year was so hard. I don't know about you guys, but last year was difficult because I started so many different things in my life. And this year,
lots of projects.
Lots of projects, exactly. And then this year is the year that we are trying to go ahead with everything.
Move forward, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been very motivational, actually.
Absolutely, very inspiring
in many aspects.
Let me know how I can help you guys. Any
Great.
time.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Fabi. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I really learned a lot.
The pleasure was all mine.
Thanks, Fabi, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us for another episode of ESL Talk.
Yes, and remember to subscribe to receive the latest episodes each Wednesday, and you can follow us on Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or you can send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at Learning with Faye, F-E-Y.
Or I'm Daniel Teacher. Well, that's it for another episode. Remember to join us again next week for another brand new episode.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes and to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for even more ESL teaching content.